Highly anticipated Indian Wells third round match between Coco Gauff and Eala ended in disappointing, really heartbreaking fashion as Coco retired down 2-6 love 2 due to a left arm injury. Gauff won their previous match a couple weeks ago in the Dubai quarterfinals, only dropping 2 games. It was 6 love 6-2. This match, of course, was very different. Coco didn't hold serve one time in the match. She had 4 game points at 2-1, and she had a 40-love lead at 2-3, but couldn't get over the finish line due to double faults or just errant forehands. Gauff, who finished the match with 7 double faults, noticeably went for a lot more on her second serve in this match, hitting it with an average speed of 98 miles per hour at one point.
There is a moment at the end of a tennis match that most people barely notice. 2 players walk to the net, shake hands, say a few words, and go their separate ways. It lasts maybe 10 seconds. Nobody in the stands can hear it. The cameras are usually moving on to replays or crowd shots before it is even finished. But sometimes, what gets said in those few seconds tells you more about 2 people than anything else that happened during the match. That is exactly what occurred when Eala and Coco Gauff met at the net at the end of their Indian Wells match, and what Gauff later revealed about that exchange says something genuinely special about both of them. If you want to follow every chapter of this story as it develops, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This rivalry is still in its early stages, and the matches coming up are going to be worth watching closely. Now let's get into the full picture. To understand why this moment matters, you need to go back 2 weeks before Indian Wells to the Dubai Tennis Championships. Gauff and Eala faced each other there, and the result was not close. Gauff won 6-0, 6-2. That kind of score does not happen by accident. It was not a match where the wrong player won or where one small thing went differently and it could have gone the other way. Gauff was the better player from start to finish by a wide margin. She controlled the tempo, she controlled the rallies, she controlled everything. Eala simply could not find a way to compete at that level on that day. A 6-0 first set is a shutout. It's the kind of result that gets shared on social media with captions about the gap that still exists between a rising young player and the established top of the game. And to be fair, those reactions were not entirely wrong in that moment. Gauff was dominant. The gap looked real. So when Indian Wells came around and the draw put these 2 together again, most people expected history to repeat itself. That is usually how it works in tennis. When one player has beaten another so convincingly and so recently, they tend to do it again. The experience, the confidence, the momentum all sit with the player who won. The player who lost has to come back and prove that the first result was not just the natural order of things. And that is genuinely difficult to do, especially against a player of Gauff's quality, on a big stage in front of a big crowd. Eala apparently did not spend much time worrying about how it was supposed to go. In her post-match interview, she talked about what she took from Dubai and how she used it. She said she studied what happened, identified the things she needed to do differently, and came into Indian Wells with a clear plan. She wanted to be more aggressive. She wanted to move better, sharper, and with more purpose. She wanted to control the tempo of rallies instead of letting Gauff dictate everything from the back of the court. She talked about keeping the intensity high, not just in her shots, but in her legs, in how she got to the ball, in how she positioned herself on every single point. That kind of preparation is not easy to talk about in a press conference after a win without it sounding like a prepared speech. But the way she described it was specific and honest, and the statistics from the match backed up everything she said. Eala made 68% of her first serves in that match. Against a top 5 player, against a 2-time Grand Slam champion, she was landing more than 2/3 of her first serves. She won 59% of the points on that first serve. She created 6 breakpoint opportunities, and she converted 5 of them. 5 breaks of serve against Coco Gauff. Those are not lucky numbers. Those are the numbers of a player who walked onto the court knowing exactly what she wanted to do, and then went out and did it. The game plan was clear, and the execution was clean. and from early in the first set, it was obvious that Gauff was facing a completely different version of her opponent compared to Dubai. Gauff was managing a physical problem from early in the match. She called the trainer during play and received treatment on her left shoulder and arm. Her first serve percentage dropped to 44%, which is a significant drop from her usual level. She served 7 double faults in the first set alone. By the time the second set began and she lost her serve in the second game, the question was no longer whether she would retire, just when. Eventually, she walked to the net, shook hands, exchanged those brief words with Eala, and that was that. The match was over. What happened next is the part that deserves more attention than it got. Gauff sat down in her post-match press conference, and someone asked her what Eala had said at the net. It was a fair question. Both players had clearly felt the weight of how the match ended. Gauff had looked regretful walking off the court. Eala had looked concerned rather than celebratory. There was a moment between them that felt genuine, even from a distance, even without being able to hear a single word. Gauff's answer was simple. She said Eala told her she hoped she felt better. Things like that. Short, genuine, human. No grand gestures, no performed emotion for the cameras. Just one competitor checking on another after a match that had ended in a way neither of them wanted. It was the kind of thing a decent person says when they see someone they respect dealing with something difficult. And the fact that it came from Eala in a moment where she had just produced one of the most impressive performances of her career so far says a lot about who she is. Because it is easy to be gracious when you lose. Almost everyone manages that, at least publicly. Showing genuine concern for someone when you have just beaten them, when you have been waiting 2 weeks to avenge a lopsided defeat, when the whole tennis world has been saying things about the gap between your levels, that is a harder and more revealing thing to do. Eala did not use that moment to celebrate or make the situation about herself. She checked on the other person. That is worth noting. But Gauff's own words in the press conference are just as remarkable, maybe more so. She said she felt really bad about having to pull out. She said you never want to retire from a match. And then she said something very specific that did not get nearly the attention it deserved. She said she felt worse about retiring because of how well Eala was playing. She said she did not want to take anything away from the way Eala was performing. Read that carefully for a second. This is a player who just had to stop mid-match because of a physical injury she could not push through. She is the one dealing with the pain, the disappointment, the frustration of not being able to finish, and her primary concern sitting in front of the press is making sure that nobody walks away from that match thinking Eala's performance was anything less than outstanding. That is a remarkable thing to say. It is also a completely unnecessary thing to say. Nobody was asking her to defend her opponent's result. She could have talked about the shoulder, expressed disappointment, thanked the crowd, and gone home. Instead, she made a deliberate choice to use her press conference to credit Eala's performance publicly. She went even further than that. She said she would have preferred to finish the match and lose 6-0 rather than retire. Think about what that actually means. The world number 4, a 2-time Grand Slam champion, would rather take a complete beating on Stadium 1 at Indian Wells than walk off and leave a match unfinished. That speaks to competitive pride at the highest level. But the way she framed it was about more than just her own pride. She framed it in terms of not wanting to shortchange what Eala was doing on the court. She wanted Eala to have the chance to finish the job properly, to earn the win in full, rather than have it arrive this way. The fact that she connected her own discomfort about retiring to the unfairness it created for her opponent is a genuinely generous way of thinking about a difficult situation. And then, almost as a side note at the end, she added that she thought Eala was going to have a great tournament. That line is not small. When the world number 4 watches you up close for the better part of an hour and then tells the press she thinks you're going to go far in the tournament, the tennis world pays attention to that. Gauff has been around long enough and competed at a high enough level that her predictions about other players carry real weight. She's not guessing. She just spent an extended period on the same court as Eala and saw firsthand what she is capable of when everything is working the way it was that day. This is not the first time Gauff has been publicly generous toward Eala. After the Dubai match, after winning convincingly by a score that most players would have used as a springboard to talk about how dominant they felt, Gauff specifically thanked Eala for bringing new fans to the sport. The Filipino supporters who turned out in Dubai had made the venue feel like a home crowd for Eala, and Gauff talked about how great that was for tennis. She said she sees why people root for Eala and that she roots for her too when they're not playing each other. That is not a standard post-match comment. That is an established player using her own platform and reputation to amplify someone who is still building hers. Gauff has a large global following and a major voice in how tennis stories get told beyond just the core fan base. When she says things like that publicly, it changes how casual observers see Eala. It gives her visibility with audiences who might not have been following her closely yet. That kind of support from someone at the top of the game is not something every rising player gets, and it's not something Gauff had to offer. She chose to. From Eala's side, the respect is just as clear. In her own press conference after Indian Wells, she talked about Gauff being a great player who will always give you a hard time. She talked about not being able to control how well your opponent plays and only being able to focus on your own game. She did not celebrate the retirement. She did not try to make the win feel bigger or more dramatic than the circumstances allowed. She acknowledged that the match ended the way it did, expressed genuine concern for Gauff's health, and focused on her own performance as the thing she was most proud of. That kind of measured, honest response after a significant win is harder to manage than it sounds. There was every opportunity to turn it into a bigger moment, and she didn't take it. And let's be clear about what that performance actually was, injury or not. You do not go 6-2 in a set and break someone's serve 5 times by accident. You do not maintain a 68% first serve percentage against a top 5 player by getting lucky or by your opponent being off. The quality was real. The preparation was real. The execution was real. Gauff said so publicly in her press conference, and by doing that, she closed off any line of argument that tried to frame Eala's performance as something that only happened because of the retirement. The foundation of that win existed regardless of how the match ended. What makes this rivalry worth watching closely going forward is not just the quality of the tennis, it's the fact that neither player has figured the other one out completely yet, and both of them know it. 2 matches, 2 completely different results. In Dubai, Gauff was the superior player from start to finish, by a margin that looked like it might define the matchup for a long time. 2 weeks later in Indian Wells, before the retirement, Eala was so dominant that the match looked like it was heading toward a similarly lopsided final score, just in the other direction. That kind of swing between 2 meetings doesn't happen very often. It tells you that the dynamic between them is genuinely unsettled, that neither player has a reliable read on what the other will bring on a given day, and that every future match between them carries real unpredictability. That is exactly the kind of rivalry that makes tennis interesting, not the predictable head-to-heads where one player almost always wins and the result feels like a formality. The ones where both players have beaten each other convincingly, where the quality can shift dramatically from one match to the next, where you genuinely don't know what's going to happen when they walk out onto the court together. The head-to-head is now 1 win each. Everything from here is wide open. Eala is 20 years old. She is ranked 31st in the world, and that ranking is moving upward. She was in the round of 16 at Indian Wells for the first time in her career. Her next match was against Linda Noskova, a player who hits the ball hard, has experience at the top level, and is not going to make things easy. But Eala was walking into that match carrying something that is genuinely difficult to manufacture. Real momentum built on real confidence. Not the kind of confidence that comes from a run of easy draws or fortunate results, the kind that comes from going on to the biggest court at one of the biggest tournaments in the world, with a crowd expecting you to lose again, against a player who just beat you badly 2 weeks ago, and then outplaying that player so thoroughly that she goes out of her way to credit you by name in her press conference. That is a very different kind of belief to play with. In the players who learn to hold on to that belief, to build on it rather than let it fade between tournaments, are the ones who end up climbing a long way. The whisper at the net was short and simple. Get well soon. Things like that. No drama, nothing designed to land well on social media, no performance of sportsmanship for the cameras. Two competitors in a difficult moment being straightforward and decent with each other because that is who they actually are. But that small, quiet exchange captures the whole story of this rivalry so far. It tells you who Eala is when the spotlight is not directly on her. It tells you who Gauff is when the match is already finished and there is nothing left to gain from being generous. And it tells you that however this rivalry develops over the next few years, and however the wins and losses stack up, it is going to be worth following closely. Not just because the tennis is good, but because the people playing it are even better. Coco Gauff did not just reveal what Eala said at the net. She told the world how she sees this player, how she sees this rivalry, and where she thinks it is going. And honestly, it is very hard to argue with her read on any of it. This story is a long way from finished.